When the man who rebuilt your empire becomes the one who can burn it down. Phillip Island was supposed to be Ducati's playground. The wind, the long arcs, the flowing rhythm, made for the red machines that had ruled MotoGP like a regime. Yet when the lights went out in Australia, the empire cracked. The one weekend where Marc Márquez's seat stayed empty became the one weekend Ducati's illusions vanished. The GP25, a monster baptized in his madness, turned into a nervous wreck without its tamer. Aprilia swept the weekend like a silent coup. Their black bikes didn't just win. They exposed what Ducati hides in press conferences, that without Márquez, the brand bleeds control. And while Bagnaia's GP25 twitched like a drunk compass, Giannantonio and his fever somehow dragged the same bike to second place. That contrast was cruel poetry. One Ducati turned into data chaos, the other into defiance. The man meant to lead the factory drowned. The one meant to follow glowed. The cameras didn't need Márquez's number 93 on track to remind the world of him. The emptiness itself screamed his worth. The Australian Grand Prix didn't just rewrite Ducati's results, it rewrote their contracts. Every Aprilia win is now a hammer on Ducati's negotiation table. Every Bagnaia crash is another zero added to whatever Márquez will ask for 2027. So what's the real question now? Whether Ducati can afford Marc Márquez, or whether it can survive without him. Comment your take. Who really owns the red factory now? The brand or the man who carries its myth? Everything looked scripted before Phillip Island. Ducati had the Triple Crown almost locked. Márquez had already sealed the 2025 title before his shoulder shattered in Mandalika. The empire was meant to coast, not collapse. But when Márquez was forced to sit out, everything that Ducati thought was team depth evaporated. The same bike that tore through the grid suddenly became undrivable. The same engineers who bragged about stability began spinning theories about tire carcasses, aerodynamics, and strange sensations. Pecco Bagnaia's decline didn't start in Australia, it began in Austria. Since that round, he's scored just 61 points. He called the bike indescribable, which is a polite way of saying unrideable. The GP25 that helped him win at Motegi with GP24 parts turned into a riddle that not even Bologna's finest could decode. Ducati kept changing setups like gamblers chasing a lost streak, and Bagnaia kept paying the bill with crashes. In qualifying, he was invisible. 4 rounds, 0 double-digit weekends, the kind of stats that get whispered in the paddock corridors with pity. And in Australia, the embarrassment hit broadcast level. 2.5 seconds per lap slower in the sprint than Bezzecchi. For a 2-time champion, that's not a struggle. That's a collapse in daylight. Meanwhile, Fabio Di Giannantonio, riding a nearly identical GP25 to Márquez's spec, kept slicing through chaos, fevered, dehydrated, shaking, but still second. He's not even the lead rider of his team, yet his data became Ducati's emergency Bible. Engineers stared at his telemetry like priests at prophecy, trying to decode what Márquez used to do naturally. Ducati's problem isn't mechanical, it's existential. The GP25 is a bike that responds only to aggression. Márquez rides it like a weapon. Bagnaia tries to understand it. That's the difference between domination and disaster. Behind closed doors, Ducati's hierarchy is shaking. Bagnaia, once the golden child, now looks like the polite face of a factory that's lost its core. The Misano test that gave him hope turned into a mirage. Nothing from that setup survived Australia. And as Aprilia's double podiums keep stacking, their factory's laughter gets louder. Ducati's slogan used to be the bike that anyone can win on. But 2025 proved the opposite. It's a one-rider religion. Question to the paddock: if Ducati's miracle needs one man's madness, what happens when that man starts charging by the heartbeat? Drop your verdict below. The Australian weekend started with irony. For the first time since Valencia 2020, no Ducati qualified on the front row. The factory that once treated qualifying like an execution lineup suddenly looked mortal. The weather was cold, the track was fast, and the red bikes were nowhere near the rhythm. In Saturday's sprint, Ducati's historical streak snapped. No podium, no power, no presence. Alex Marquez had pace for the box but gambled wrong on front tire compound. Giannantonio was too deep in the grid, though his pace across practice screamed podium speed. Bezzecchi, armed with a double long lap penalty, still made the sprint look like a one-man massacre. His Aprilia carved through Phillip Island with authority Ducati used to own. Behind him, Raul Fernandez rode like he'd just found purpose in chaos. The Trackhouse Aprilia looked smooth where the GP25 was violent. Bagnaia's race? A humiliation on live TV. He looked like a passenger on a malfunctioning missile. The front end twitched on straights, the rear stepped out under throttle. Ducati engineers inverted his setup Sunday morning in desperation. Suspension, ride height, electronics, everything but prayer. The result was worse. By lap 24 of 27, the inevitable happened. Bagnaia slid out while running 12th, 11 seconds behind Giannantonio. Another DNF to feed the headline machine. Meanwhile, DG, half ill and half demonic, held off the Aprilias long enough to remind everyone that when Marquez isn't around, he's the only man left who can interpret the GP25's language. Fernandez's win might look like an underdog story, but it was an autopsy for Ducati. Aprilia took the weekend that was supposed to confirm Bologna's dominance and turned it into evidence. Their bikes were smoother, faster in change of direction, and eerily stable at top speed. When Bagnaia watched the replay, he saw his nightmare in 4K. Giannantonio handling the same chaos that destroyed him. In a single weekend, Ducati's machine-first philosophy fell apart. The GP25 doesn't win races, Marc Márquez does. And without him, all that remains is expensive confusion. So here's the battlefield truth. Phillip Island didn't just crown Aprilia, it exposed Ducati's dependence like blood on white gloves. Drop your thoughts. Was Ducati's failure mechanical or spiritual? Bagnaia looked into the post-race interviews like a man trying to recognize his own voice. His words were polished, but his eyes said what the lap times already screamed. He doesn't understand the GP25 anymore. Confidence gone, instinct broken. When a rider loses that, data can't save him. At the same moment, Ducati's boardroom started calculating damage, not in championship points, but in negotiation leverage. Every Ducati failure since Marquez's injury raised his price. Every Aprilia win made Ducati look more like a brand borrowing glory from one man. Inside Bologna, whispers turned into meetings. Engineers pointing at Marquez's telemetry, team managers pushing for salary exceptions. Ducati's famous post-COVID salary discipline suddenly looked like an outdated fairy tale. The GP25 itself became symbolic of Ducati's paradox. Designed to be faster than the GP24, yet less stable. Designed for domination, yet undrivable for anyone not named Marquez. Even Giannantonio, as strong as he's been, openly said his bike moves a lot. But unlike Bagnaia, he didn't fight the bike, he danced with it. And so the illusion broke. Ducati doesn't build all-rounders anymore. It builds weapons custom-fitted to one warrior. When that warrior goes missing, the machine becomes a liability. Aprilia's double victory was more than a celebration. It was a warning flare to Bologna. Fernandez's win pushed Aprilia past 300 GP victories across classes, a milestone wrapped in symbolism. The underdog manufacturer has turned into Ducati's mirror image. Stable, strategic, and suddenly hungrier. Pecco Bagnaia, meanwhile, stands on the edge of a strange cliff. Once Ducati's symbol of composure, he now represents its chaos. His post-Motegi collapse isn't just about points, it's about identity. He's the company man who's suddenly become replaceable. And the cruelest part? Ducati can't fix this with engineering anymore. This is psychological. This is about belief. If your factory is built on one man's spirit, what happens when that spirit learns how valuable he's become? Marquez has changed the laws of MotoGP economics again. In 2024, Ducati threw out its policy to sign him. By 2025, he paid them back with a 7th title and the kind of dominance that made every other rider look like an echo. But after Phillip Island 2025, Ducati's leverage is gone. They don't negotiate from power anymore. They negotiate from need. Bagnaia's Ducati life or dream now sounds like nostalgia. He's loyal, yes, but loyalty doesn't lap 2 seconds faster. His 2025 meltdown has turned next year into a survival exam. Ducati can't afford to bench him, but they also can't let him drag the GP25's reputation down with him. Márquez, meanwhile, holds all the cards. The 2027 talks are no longer about salary. They're about sovereignty. Ducati knows that every time he sits out, the whole operation trembles. They can't replace him with Acosta, they can't lure back Martin, and they can't rely on a fading Bagnaia. This isn't a blank check scenario, but it's close enough. Ducati will pay whatever it takes, because without Márquez, they aren't a dynasty. They're a memory. The irony? They built the GP25 around him to chase perfection, and in doing so, they chained their entire brand to one man's shoulder socket. And as Aprilia celebrates, as KTM sharpens Acosta for 2026, Ducati finds itself cornered between legacy and dependence. The fans might still chant Ducati domination, but the truth is brutal. Domination borrowed is domination lost. The next chapter will begin not on track, but across a table in Bologna, when Marc Márquez walks in, calm, surgical, smiling. Ducati will offer money, he'll offer history. The question is, who's really negotiating whom? From here, where does Ducati go? Into Márquez's era, or back into the darkness they escaped? The time will tell us. Comment your verdict and subscribe for the next firestorm.